Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on storage solutions, energy assets meet energy markets. My name is Alfonso Barrenechea. I'm a project manager here at Solarplaza. And with me, I'm joined by Ville Rimali, Director of Growth and Development at Wärtsilä, as well as George Hilton, a Senior Analyst for Energy Storage at IHS Markit. A quick agenda so you guys know what'll be on schedule today. We'll have two presentations by George and Ville, followed by a short discussion and then Q&As. I encourage everyone that has a question to use the Q&A function as soon as possible. You don't have to wait until the Q&A portion of the webinar. We will be filtering those questions and we will try to address as many as possible at the end. So a little bit about Solarplaza before we start. Our mission is to positively impact the world by accelerating the sustainable energy transition. We were established in 2004. We're based in Rotterdam. And how do we try to positively impact, the energy transition? We do this by organizing events, both virtual, hybrid, as well as physical events. Of course, we've done over 150 events in 41 countries. We have a network of over 60,000 solar PV professionals. And today's webinar is kind of an introduction or an allusion to the conference we'll be having, Solar Asset Management Europe. It'll take place on the 15th and 16th of September in Frankfurt. There is a limited number of tickets, so if you're considering it, if you're on the fence, this is a good time to get one. This is also your last chance at a discount. If you use the code webinar-5, you'll be able to get a 5% discount on the ticket, and hopefully we'll see a couple of you in Frankfurt as well. And some practical notes from my side so that you guys are aware of how our webinar platform works. And if you have any questions, as I mentioned, you can use the Q&A or the chat box, and we will answer them after the presentations and after the discussion. But of course, as soon as you come up with a question, we strongly encourage that you write it out already. We'll have them waiting for the Q&A session anyways. If you have any technical issues, you can also use the chat box and we'll try to fix any problems that you have. And the presentation slides as well as the recordings will be made available for everyone. You can expect to receive an email with these instructions 1 to 2 days after the webinar concludes, so after today. And to talk a bit about our speakers, I'll start with Ville Rimali first. He's a Director of Growth and Development at Wärtsilä. He's a power system modeling expert. He leads a team of energy experts driving growth in new markets. He has managed project developments both in Africa as well as in Europe, has a sales track record of over 130 million, including several energy storage projects, and he's got a master's degree in power systems and economics. Our other speaker today will be George Hilton. He's a senior analyst for IHS Markits, focusing on energy storage. He's part of the gas, power, and energy futures team at IHS Markit. He focuses on European energy storage markets with a particular interest in energy storage use cases, illustrating interaction with other technologies and industries. He also has plenty of modeling experience with MATLAB, Python, and Excel. And his academic background comes from a master's in mechanical engineering, as well as a PhD in energy engineering, with, again, a focus on energy storage. And before we go on to the first presentations, I would like to start with a poll, just to get a feel of what the audience is thinking in terms of storage knowledge, let's say, or storage trends. And the poll we're about to launch is, which is the fastest growing energy storage market in Europe? Is it Germany, UK, Spain, Ireland, or Italy? I'll give you guys, the attendees, a couple of seconds, maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute to answer. And then we'll begin with the first presentation of George, as well as discussing this. All right, if we can see the results now. George, I'd like to invite you to take this poll as well right before your presentation. And what are your thoughts on this answer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this pretty much aligns with what we're seeing, and I can go into more detail on that in my presentation. But yeah, well-informed audience we have today with the UK winning. I think that's the picture we are also seeing.
Excellent. Well then, George, I'll let you begin your presentation. You have controls of the presentation, and the floor is yours.
Brilliant, thanks Alfonso. So yeah, today I'm going to focus on energy storage in Europe. And I think Europe's a particularly kind of interesting region to be talking about for energy storage for a number of reasons, and I'll go into those throughout my talk today. But first, I just want to focus on what energy storage is and how it can be used for the grid and for energy networks going forwards. So kind of back to the basics, I guess, for the first slide. So energy storage is a form of flexibility, and flexibility is a really key component in enabling the energy transition and enabling deeper decarbonisation of electricity networks through having more solar and wind assets taking a greater proportion of generation. Energy storage can be installed in a range of different places, and we typically put those into two kind of buckets. Firstly, we have behind the meter energy storage, where energy storage is used at commercial or residential kind of locations, and it's really installed to reduce electricity costs, either by optimizing self-consumption or the time of use of energy for the kind of place where it's installed. Energy storage can also be installed in front of the meter installations, and these are typically much larger utility scale installation types where energy storage is either installed on its own or co-located with a solar, wind, or other generation assets. What we're seeing in that kind of front of the meter space is a kind of rapidly reducing costs of batteries, enabling more and more applications for energy storage to be competitive. And as that process kind of continues, we're moving from short duration through to medium duration installations for energy storage in the front of the meter segment. And so far, as we've gone along that process, lithium-ion batteries have taken up around 95% of the global market for energy storage. However, as we move to longer duration applications, which are needed to provide longer term balancing of energy, of renewable energy assets, there's still an open question in the market as to what technology is going to be particularly well taken up for these long duration segments. So lithium-ion batteries are dominant at the moment, and the key point here is that these lithium-ion batteries can do a multitude of different things, particularly as they're becoming cheaper. And as that list of applications grows, we're seeing longer duration assets, and as I said, a wider range of different things that those batteries are actually doing for the grid. So with this kind of complex picture of different batteries being installed in different places and doing different things, how does that actually all come together to an overall view for the outlook of the market? Well, that's what I'm trying to show here in the forecast, which is plotted out in the chart on the left. So what we're showing here is the annual installations of energy storage each year from 2015 through to 2030. And if you look kind of closely at 2020 and 2021, you'll see that the energy storage industry is really growing particularly rapidly this year. It's going to more than double in size in 2021. And that kind of doubling is going to spark the start of a period of really strong, robust growth in the industry through to 2030. And much of that growth is coming from the front of the meter segment, which is highlighted in teal in this chart at the top. And so as we look forward to the end of the decade, I think we'll get to a point where energy storage is performing some really crucial, critical roles for grid infrastructure around the world, and is really actively promoting much deeper decarbonisation in many grids. In the chart on the right of this slide, I've broken out the global forecast by region. And I want to focus on the Europe, Middle East and Africa segment in green at the bottom of this chart. And whilst Middle East and Africa is also included in this, I think this is really dominated by Europe as the largest segment of that part of the chart. And you can see that through to 2019, Europe had a really growing market share globally, and that was due to strong opportunities for frequency response, particularly in the UK and Germany, where these countries were particularly kind of forward-looking in their approach to using energy storage for balancing networks. However, as we move into 2021, we're going to see a kind of fairly dramatic fall in the market share of Europe, and that's really because other countries, particularly the US, are looking to introduce storage to do storage alongside solar power in particular, and that's taking up a much larger proportion of the global installations. As we move forward towards 2030, Europe will maintain around 15% market share globally, and that's despite really strong growth in China in response to an energy storage target there. And we're expecting China to become the largest market for energy storage in 2025, and that's represented by the large growth in the proportion of the global market taken up by the Asia Pacific in this chart. So the energy storage industry is quite diffuse. There's lots of different things going on in lots of different markets, and that's what I've tried to represent on this chart here. So what we're looking at is the compound annual growth rate on the y-axis. So higher up on the y-axis means more growth annually, and on the x-axis we're looking at the essentially the market size dictated by the annual installations in 2021. And I've broken out each market that we look at, IHS market, and use this as a way to kind of put to segment the market into various different regions. So there's a couple of things I want to highlight on this chart. Firstly, most of the global markets are still emerging, and that's quantified by being less than around 250 megawatts in annual installations and having positive growth. And within this kind of emerging bucket on the left-hand side of this chart, I want to highlight a few markets where growth is particularly strong. So we're looking at places like South Africa, Taiwan, and the Philippines, which are all going to post higher than 75% annual growth rates for the next 5 years. And this really demonstrates the scope of the energy storage industry to rapidly grow in conditions where new opportunities are brought through. And that's independent of the market size. If we look at the right-hand side of this graph, though, we're looking at the developed markets, and there are relatively few here. These are countries like China and the US, which have particularly large installations, large quantities of annual installations. And the small number of developed markets for energy storage really highlights how nascent the market is as a whole, and how much scope for growth there is globally going forwards. Zooming in on Europe, though, if we go to the next slide, we can see that if I strip out all the markets that aren't in Europe from this chart, what's essentially happened is the really high growth markets are removed, and also the really large markets are removed. And this helps us to really define what Europe looks like and how Europe can compare on a global scale. So what we're really looking at is relatively smaller markets than globally, and also relatively lower growth than we're seeing elsewhere. However, the thing to kind of contradict that and point out at this point is looking at markets like the Netherlands, Spain, and the UK, where we are anticipating around higher than 25% annual growth going forwards. So that's not really growth to be. You can't really call that slow. It's just that it's lower than we're seeing globally, and that's really how we define the way that we look at Europe. So So Europe is kind of defined by these small market sizes, relatively lower growth when compared to other regions. But within Europe, there's actually quite a lot of variation. I've tried to highlight this in this chart on the left, which shows the front of the meter installations. So we are expecting between 2020 and 2030, so over the next decade. At the start of my presentation, we asked the attendees which countries would have the most growth for Europe, and I think the majority of attendees suggested that the United Kingdom would, and that's also what we're seeing in IHS Markit. So the United Kingdom will lead the growth for Europe. And that's really because the revenue stack, so the number of different things that there's different applications that energy storage can do, is much more developed in the United Kingdom than elsewhere in Europe. And so that creates a much more robust and enduring market opportunity for energy storage in the UK, which is leading to the stronger growth that we're anticipating in this outlook. If you compare that to other countries in Europe, so highlighting France, Spain, Ireland, Italy, Portugal here, these other countries don't have the breadth of different opportunities for energy storage to earn revenue in different markets. And that really limits the opportunities for developers to really build a kind of robust revenue stack. And so whilst there might be some limited kind of some opportunities that have relatively limited scope, like capacity markets in France, once those opportunities are full, it then means that there's not a kind of enduring market opportunity for energy storage in these countries. And this is really one of the big reasons why Europe is seen as, well, we're starting to see Europe as having relatively lower growth than elsewhere, is because that revenue stack is more difficult to build in some markets of Europe. And highlighting that again on the right-hand side of this chart, you can see I've broken out the percentage change in annual installations when you compare each year to 2020. And what we will see in the global market is strong growth globally across the board. However, what stands out in this chart is really the growth in China, which is going to be pretty dramatic and continuous throughout the rest of the decade. However, for Europe and the US, we'll see strong growth over the next few years, and then that growth is maintained at a slightly slower rate throughout the rest of the decade. I'm going to finish my remarks here by just looking a bit more at the applications that are going to drive the growth and how we're expecting that to develop and change in Europe over the next 10 years. Because some of these changes are going to be relatively dramatic, I think. So this chart shows the use cases that we are anticipating to drive most installations for Europe through to 2030. And you'll really see frequency response in teal is taking the majority of installations in 2021 and next year. However, this is an opportunity that's going to quickly saturate across the continent, and new markets may look to use this as a way of starting energy storage opportunities in their countries, and that's happening in the Nordics and Italy at the moment. However, it's quite a shallow opportunity generally, and we're seeing this becoming saturated across Europe by around 2025, and it won't lead to significant new installations beyond that time frame. Secondly, we have, so to replace frequency response as the driver for new installations in Europe, we see two really kind of new and exciting opportunities for energy storage. And these are upgrade deferral and renewable enhancement. And these will be the kind of first and second place drivers for new installations across Europe. Upgrade deferral is where energy storage is used to reduce the initial cost of grid infrastructure upgrades, or to kind of delay those upgrades from happening. And we're seeing the kind of first steps in the creation of these markets with projects like the Ringo project in France and grid boosters in Germany, and also a number of local flexibility opportunities arising around Europe run by DNOs. And renewable enhancement we see as being the largest new opportunity for energy storage across Europe. And this is really also quite nascent at the moment, with a couple of relatively small tenders seen in Portugal and Germany for energy storage to be co-located with solar. However, going forwards, if you look at the examples set elsewhere globally, such as Israel, South Africa, and the US, we've really seen energy storage start to play a major role in allowing really significant installations of solar power at a relatively low cost, using relatively longer duration energy storage assets than we see in Europe. And that's going to be a major growth factor to enable that deep decarbonisation that's requested across Europe by many regulators. And so it's not 100% clear right now how that renewable enhancement opportunity is going to develop, but we see it being a particularly strong driver, especially beyond 2025. With that, that wraps up my prepared remarks today. I think we are going to go to I'm going to hand back to Alfonso at this point, who's going to talk through a poll or hand over to Ville for his presentation.
Thanks, George. Thanks for those insights. Yeah, Ville, I invite you to take the stage as well and begin your presentation. Actually, the second poll we have in line, we'll launch it after Ville's presentation. So, Ville, I'll give you the stage now, and you can go ahead.
All right. Good morning from my side as well. I will give short presentation today regarding how these energy storage assets can be used in energy markets, and I will do a little bit deep dive to UK market. But first, why Wärtsilä is eager to talk about energy storage? We have been one of the first ones in the industry. We have over 10 years track record on energy storage installations through acquisition. And as you can see, the market is growing, and also Wärtsilä has been able to capture nice share of that market growth. And you can see that we have not only concentrated for the biggest markets, but we have been able to get projects pretty much all around the world. And so far, we have around 1.5 gigawatt of storage projects under operation or contracted. But what we have clearly seen that what has happened on the market, and there is a little bit similarities also with the solar, that actually the hardware in solar and storage is getting more like a commodity. There has been consolidation on the market, but at the same time, actually the energy markets are getting more demanding. There is constantly new products when the TSOs are struggling to handle the grid and balance the grid with new renewables. And that's why the software is actually getting to important role. There is similarities with our smartphones, where basically the hardware is there, but through software you can actually over your life cycle do different things with your asset, depending on how the markets are developing. And our GEMS digital energy platform is, for example, able to utilize the storage together with renewables, either wind or solar. We have done some spinning reserve replacement projects for thermal assets. This energy storage can be also operated as a bigger virtual power plant fleet. And then, of course, one of the most challenging for the software is handle actually the microgrids and really operate that millisecond to millisecond on balanced way. And the newest feature what we have is actually the IntelliBidder. Some of the US and Australian market, the GEMS software is actually able to bid on the different markets and really optimizing that utilizing the sophisticated forecast and artificial intelligence. But let's move then a little bit towards the UK market. These are the intraday prices of the first half of the each year from 2019 to 2021. Firstly, you can see that price volatility has increased over this 3-year period. And when you start to look at a little bit in detail, you can see that in 2020, when the COVID hit really badly, there were a lot of low price hours. But now, during the 2021, the first half, we have been seeing the recovery on the market prices. There has been some asset closures during the 2020 on the market, and demand is on the higher level. So average prices and price volatility has increased significantly. But as we know, the baseload assets are dependent on the average prices. Peaker assets requires the price volatility and high prices. But what is the beauty of the energy storage is actually that it can benefit the whole full price volatility. So energy storage asset owners are benefiting both the low prices and high prices. And that's why they have been in extremely good position over this COVID period and also after the COVID, when the price volatility and high prices has stayed on the market. So we can clearly see that the energy storage owners has been actually the biggest winners over this COVID period. And of course, we will see similar phenomena on the market again when the renewables share start to increase step by step. Then we hear quite frequently the question that how about combining solar actually with the storage? If we start from the left side, where we see the solar business case on the lines, we have marked the LCOE of solar on 2021 and expected LCOE at 2030. And you can see that on the pillars, which are showing that how much revenue you can get from the market, you can see that basically 2019, 2020, the business case for solar has been pretty okay. And especially on the 2021, the business case has been extremely good. They have earned kind of a 20 pound per megawatt hour uplift on their revenues. So we can clearly see that cannibalization for solar is not happening in the UK market yet. And of course, one reason for that is that the UK is more leaning towards the wind power. But then on the right side, if you look at the solar and storage, again, we are expecting that the LCOE will decrease around 20 pounds per megawatt hour by 2030. But if comparing the current prices to 2019, 2020 prices, we can see that the feasibility is not there yet. Half of the revenue is basically missing. But at 2021, it has been much closer when the prices has been higher and more volatile during the evening hours, which start to be quite on the edge if this is just using the intraday revenue. So if you are able to do a little bit revenue stacking, you actually could see the business case for solar and storage based on this year prices. Of course, another question is that do we believe that this year prices continues as on the same level on following years? And this is basically the forecast by national grid operator in UK. At the moment, there is around 1.5 gigawatt of battery energy storage, and rest is the pump hydro. And what they are expecting that will grow around 20 gigawatt by 2035. So certainly we are seeing massive growth, which could reach the six-fold growth during the next 15 years. But at the end, I wanted to present a couple of our references, what we have done to UK market. Let's start with Pivot Power. We have a partnership with them. The company is now owned by EDF Renewable. But we delivered or completed just the first batch of the projects, 50 megawatt hour projects in Oxford and Kent. And we just contracted another set. And interestingly, you can actually see that there has been shift on the market, and the first contracts were with 1 hour batteries, and now Pivot wanted from us 2 hour batteries. So clearly, there is more market opportunities for batteries, and the utilization is going more from the balancing towards the renewable integration. And in this installation, what George mentioned, the revenue stack is extremely important. This project has been pretty innovative, stacking different revenue streams, operating on intra and day ahead balancing markets. And then they are balancing also the local private distribution grid, which has, I believe, one of the UK's biggest EV charging station under construction. So this is really balancing the local grid, enabling the more renewables in the big scale, and innovatively combining different revenue streams. And then a little bit different type of reference from Setland Island. Smaller installation, of course, the grid is there quite much smaller. But again, this is multi-use storage asset. It integrates wind power at the island, and at the same time, it's used for spinning reserve replacement. They need to keep less spinning reserves on the thermal power plant when they have this super fastly reacting battery asset in their system. And even there is plans in the future connect this island to main grid. It certainly needed the balancing on the island. So that was basically short presentation from my side. In nutshell, it's important to be innovative, combining different revenue streams to make feasibility on your project. But luckily, the market trends are leaning on the right direction, and we strongly believe that there is more market opportunities for batteries coming in the UK market.
Thank you, Ville, for that very informative presentation. I think these two presentations set a nice, foundation for the discussion we're about to have now. Before we begin the discussion, I would like to launch one final poll. The question being, what driver will have the biggest impact on new storage installations? Will it be transmission or distribution, arbitrage, frequency response, co-located renewables plus storage, or the capacity market / auctions? We'll give our attendees a minute, a couple of seconds to answer the question. But in the meantime, George, Ville, I'm quite curious to hear your thoughts on this poll as well, and it's a nice way to kick off the discussion.
Yeah, I think George already touched this topic, and clearly there is kind of the time element, the frequency, and ancillary services has been clearly the biggest kind of option or use case for the storage in the early days, but now I think we are leaning more towards all another alternatives while what we see on the list.
Great. Yeah, we can see the results now. George, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is kind of aligned with what we are seeing in terms of co-located renewables and storage being kind of the not necessarily the strongest driver we see at the moment, but the potential like for new growth. It's potentially the deepest and like most robust long-term market for energy storage that we see. I think it's interesting to see capacity markets and also on a kind of par with transmission distribution. I think we highlighted T&D as a potential growth case more so than capacity markets, but I know that you, Ville, have a slightly different view to that. You kind of like the capacity market opportunity. Maybe you could share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay, maybe not. I think we strongly believe that the open electricity market or spot markets should be the main driver and for the new investments. But if looking the UK capacity market, that has been quite successful, really delivering the flexibility on the system and ensuring that there can be more renewables, but balance a proper way. And if looking kind of the list of the projects, what has been bidding on those capacity markets, and which has been cleared, and also what has been the simulations that which type of assets has the better chance, or basically which requires the lowest price or compensation from the capacity market, and there the storage is clearly one of the winner, and compared to the baseload gas, for example, I think they probably need 3 times more compensation from the capacity market compared to batteries. So I believe that if the capacity market prices in UK increase even a bit, we can certainly see a lot of new battery projects coming in UK market.
Great, yeah, great. Then I think with that we can begin the discussion. One last thing from my side, I see some questions already coming in. Again, for the attendees, as soon as you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A box. We'll be filtering for the questions. We have allocated a small amount of time at the end for your questions. So if you do want to make sure we can get yours answered, I encourage everyone to go for that as soon as you have the question in your mind. With that, I'll give you the two of you the stage, and we can begin the discussion.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alfonso. I had a question on your presentation, Ville. You saw the kind of the first order, as it were, from Pivot Power at 1 hour, the second order at 2 hours. Is that kind of linked to the higher volatility that we're seeing in the UK electricity prices that you're seeing? Is that like the direct response of that, or was it another driver, you think, from Pivot Power that led to that longer duration?
Yeah, I believe so, and we have been doing also some simulations on the UK market, and I think all the way from the beginning we saw that actually, if you look at from feasibility point of view, the 2-hour storage can be, or was already earlier, more feasible than 1 hour battery. But of course, if you start to look at from investment risk point of view, you need to invest much less the 1 hour system to get at least some revenue. Even the business case was slightly better or already earlier for 2-hour battery. And now when the market is getting more mature, I think people start to be ready to invest seriously on the market, and now they are really investing on the best fit products. Mm-hmm. How about Giorgio, in your presentation, I remember that the UK and Germany were the biggest markets, and then kind of the next batch was to France, Spain, Italy, Ireland, and you mentioned that they have less chance for the revenue stacking. What these countries should do that they could be on the first batch after a couple of years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so it's a good question. I think one of the things that we see being particularly useful for the UK, and I think you kind of mentioned it, was that kind of electricity wholesale price volatility, enabling a kind of merchant market model whereby energy storage can have like non-contracted revenues. So it has revenues that aren't necessarily tied to a capacity market contract or a frequency response contract. And so that's kind of, I think, going to be a really critical component of increasing new opportunities across Europe. And I think that that's a little bit more challenging on continental Europe because the grid is so much bigger, and so there's more kind of inherent stability in that, and so the price fluctuations are going to be inherently lower, and that's kind of what's constricting the growth opportunities. I think to drive new growth, though, it's really, to me, tied to those two opportunities that we spoke about. Obviously, there's co-located with solar, we could see a whole raft of new tenders, particularly from like national tenders, asking specifically for those technologies, and that would lead to new installations, clearly. And equally, I think there's a new market opportunity for T&D upgrade deferral, which could lead to quite substantial growth, but that would have to be developed by the TSOs or the DNOs, and they could develop a new market mechanisms to drive that forward. And so it's that kind of development of new opportunities that we would need to see on continental Europe to replace the more the less volatile wholesale price that when you compare it to the UK. That's what would lead to more growth, I think.
Yeah, I certainly agree that what we have been looking, the price volatility is not that significant in continental Europe, and certainly they are pretty well interconnected, and also we see that some of the markets has not really, or the spot markets has not really delivered any of the new investments. There has been kind of little bit on top of the market, some subsidies to really support investments to certain type of capacity. For example, in Germany, the grid operators got the permission to acquire or build some backup capacity, which are not actually operated in the market. So all these kind of quick fixes on top of the market may influence on the business case of different technologies competing on the market basis.
Yeah, sure. And we have, as you kind of alluded to, actually, a lot of different market areas where energy storage is competing directly against thermal generation. How do you think that's going to develop over the next 10 years? Is energy storage going to be more competitive with gas as time goes on? Yeah, what are your views on that?
Yeah, at least the political support is certainly on the batteries, and a little bit less for the thermal assets. Of course, if starting from the emission mechanisms, that's indirectly impacting for batteries competitiveness, assuming of course that you charge with green power, which is the case typically. And what I touch also in my presentation, I see that doing the investment for the batteries is one of the least risky alternative, because when you look at the market prices, most likely we see a decrease on the average prices, which is really challenging for the base load, and we see more volatility, and we will see also negative prices, and of course all another technologies, or at least some technologies, are suffering on these negative prices, but battery storage can take a big benefit of those. So I think this uncertainty during the energy transition is benefiting a lot energy storage asset owners, because pretty much whatever happen on the market prices, the storage is doing relatively okay. How about you? How you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. As we get much deeper decarbonisation across Europe, we'll inherently have more volatility, and I think that will lead to greater merchant opportunities for energy storage across the continent. I think it remains to be seen how that's going to lead to new installations, whether we'll see more tenders for co-located storage, whether that will drive whether we'll see kind of capacity markets being the kind of thing that needs to fall in order to create a revenue stream that's kind of robust and allows energy storage to be installed, but then it kind of creates has more revenues than it expects because of all these new opportunities. I think that there's plenty of different ways that we could get to that paradigm, but I think that that's that kind of picture of more volatility and batteries being more competitive against thermal is what's going to happen over the next 10 years for sure.
And it has been interesting to see that at least some countries are now discussing that they want to have some kind of on top of the spot market mechanism to support only the completely decarbonized flexibility. And I think Spain is the most developed on that field, and they are seriously thinking that there is 0 grams per kilowatt CO2 emission limit, which blocks quite many other technologies, and then batteries are certainly on top of the list out of these completely decarbonized options, because if you try to do the baseload type of project on hydrogen, I think you would require pretty significant capacity payment to make it feasible. So the batteries certainly will take benefit if we see more that type of market.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about we all have been, of course, following these extreme weather conditions, and climate change clearly is happening, and there has been really unfortunate stories around the world. This year, the latest, of course, the Ida hurricane in New Orleans. By the way, related to that one, I heard some positive news just yesterday. Wärtsilä power plant in heart of the New Orleans was the power plant which was used to start building actually the grid back when it was, of course, completely off, when the load and the grid did not survive fully of that hurricane. How you see this and other cases like fires in California and Australia, floods? Can these actually incentivize investment for the storage, or can we say that storage can improve the resiliency of the grid?
Yeah, I think it's a really pressing and topical question, isn't it? Especially after we've seen the wildfires in Greece recently. They were pretty stark. I hadn't seen such kind of devastation in Europe because of this before. There is a kind of way that energy storage can help with that, though, and we've seen this as a growing opportunity in California, where the wildfires are a little bit more regular, and they're often, when there's a risk of a wildfire in California, the grid operator turns off portions of the network to kind of help to not start a new wildfire. And so under those situations, people can go without power for a week, etc., whilst wildfire risk is high. And energy storage clearly plays a particular role and has an opportunity there to improve the resiliency of those power networks under those conditions by allowing these communities that are cut off to have power throughout that time. I think if we think about Europe, energy storage could absolutely start to play that role. And I think having more distributed energy storage installed around in people's homes, in people's companies, etc., is definitely going to be critical for that. And I think if this does become a more regular occurrence, we may see some energy storage, some kind of good news energy storage topics where it's being used to power homes under these situations. I think that that's relatively likely.
That's really interesting. I actually even didn't know that in California the TSO can turn off the power, just avoiding to cause more fires. And if that's the case, I clearly understand that batteries could make a big difference. Actually, another case of these extreme weather conditions, not the heat, but actually the cold. In February, there were this extremely cold period in Texas, and when that was happening, of course, there were each and every pointing on finger for different directions. First it was said that it was caused by renewables, then they blamed the gas and oil companies, that there were difficulties on gas supply, and then I think some point of time even the fossil power plant owners were blamed. But after the situation was fixed, I read at least some more research what was done for this situation, and one of the conclusions was that actually around 2 gigawatt of energy storage could potentially have solved the issue. And okay, first you may question that 2 gigawatts is actually a lot. It's a lot, but that's about the same amount what they are planning or building this year. So if it would have happened 1 year later, it could potentially have been avoided. And maybe the second question, how the battery could solve the issue for that such a long time. But there were really the escalation kind of effect when you first lose some of the power plants during this, and actually the load was much higher because the people were using more heating than expected, and then you load and generation is not in balance. They tried to do some load shedding, but the frequency started to fluctuate, and then it really cascaded that even they at the end tried to load shed 10 gigawatt of power, and actually that time they also set some of the pumping stations for the gas pipeline, which cascade another issue that then the gas pressure drops and power plants went, or even more power plants went offline. So it looked that it's a long period issue, but it all happened actually within the 2 hours. And if that would have been able to balance with storage smart way, it could have been potentially avoided the whole situation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think sadly these events will become more and more common, but energy storage, I think, is a particularly well-placed technology to have to improve resiliency in all kind of adverse kind of situations that the grid comes across. We'll probably have to, or we could chat about these things for a long time, I think, Ville, but we'll have to move to the audience questions. So yeah, happy to answer any that have come up, Alfonso.
Yeah, thanks the two of you for that discussion. We have actually plenty of questions relating both to the discussion and to your presentations as well. I think we can start, George. This question's a bit more for you, based on your presentation. The question is, how long will renewables be continued to be put in two separate boxes? So solar plus wind being in one box, and then either solar or wind plus storage in another one. What are your thoughts on this? I know you had a graph on it in a small discussion about it during your presentation, but how do you see this evolving in the next, let's say, 5-10 years?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, and it's something we're talking about a little bit more, is this kind of shift towards hybrid plants where instead of just solar with maybe batteries as a kind of niche addition to the plant, we have quite a significant growth in our outlook of solar plus wind plus battery installations, and in some instances even hydrogen production within that. And so I think going forward, that will become much more the norm. The question in my mind is how does the kind of business case get built around that? Because pairing storage with wind is inherently a little bit more difficult, because wind variability is over a longer duration, typically 2-3 days, whereas solar is quite predictable. And so the actual use case for the storage device is a little bit more complicated to come to and to build a business case around. But having said that, the costs of that installation compared to standalone kind of solar wind storage on their own is lower when they're combined. So I think inherently it will become a more widely taken up type of installation because of that.
All right, Ville, your thoughts on this? I can imagine on the development side, you also get to see these trends.
Yeah, well, I think still doing the solar and wind alone is feasible in many markets, and of course when looking the forecasts, it looks that the cannibalization start to get more significant, and that we are hearing also from our customers, and I think that's really the trigger when the kind of standalone business case does not make sense anymore. Then you certainly start to look at alternatives, and then you combine the storage.
All right. Yeah, then speaking on feasible business cases, Ville, I think this one's for you as well. We have a viewer asking if you have any thoughts on how important the implementations of the CEP by the EU member states will be in allowing batteries to fulfill their business value or their business potential. I think this kind of goes into the concept of at times things are being double taxed, and that can also affect storage business models. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, we clearly see that in the countries where this regulatory bottlenecks has been solved, has been the biggest growing markets, and of course I think the political will is that countries want to see a lot of storage at the moment, and that of course speed up the regulation changes, and I think the Germany has been the latest who has actually fixed some of these double taxation challenges and other regulatory barriers.
All right, George, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that, really. I think I'll echo Ville on that in saying that it's quite clear that energy storage is a regulatory kind of priority for lots of countries at the moment, and these to me are just problems that are waiting to be solved, and the industry's just got to kind of wait until that happens just now, and I think that will be sooner rather than later for most industries, most markets.
All right, then sticking with you, George, aside from regulatory constraints, do you feel that grid constraints, specifically in Ireland, will help accelerate the storage installations in the market? Or what else do you feel is restricting the growth potential, specifically for Ireland in this case?
Yeah, okay, well, Ireland is kind of a small, It's slightly different to the rest of Europe because it's an island. I think the name kind of gives that away. So the UK itself has seen much more growth in storage, and that's really because of its islanded nature. So I would anticipate Ireland will follow in that trajectory, but it is a few years behind. It's just doing its first kind of steps with the DS3, and that's seen a kind of really strong growth in Ireland. But going forwards, I think we'll have to look to different revenue streams. T&D could be one of those to kind of build that revenue stack that's needed for a robust kind of long-term energy storage opportunity. We're not there yet for Ireland, but yeah, a few things could come together, T&D being one of those.
All right. Then, yeah, sticking with, I guess, newer markets, and Ville, this one's more for you. Could you advise on tools or expertise in assessing or recommending opportunities for storage in countries that currently have no clear regulations or clear incentives or goals for storage? And I imagine with your experience in the African market, for example, that is still in the development stages, what is your advice for developers looking to expand into storage?
Yeah, if looking kind of beyond Europe, the African market, I think the financing is the biggest bottleneck there, and you need to get kind of certainty on the revenues. There is no, well, basically in Europe, pretty much all storages are on the merchant market, but that's not possible or bankable in Africa. And that's why, for example, South Africa, which is clearly the biggest one, that there is kind of a governmental PPAs what you can get to build, and then there is big tenders for those. And I think that's the only way at the moment to ramp up really the storage installation in African market.
All right. Yeah, then I guess next question for either of you or the two of you, it's relating to the changes in PPA pricing, in PPA duration, etc. Do you think this could somehow play a role in storage development? I guess it also relates to the growing merchant market in Europe, in particular, in some countries. How could you relate this to storage?
Yeah, I think I can tackle this one first. So the most energy storage installations that we've seen under a PPA are not in Europe, as kind of Ville just said. So he's highlighted South Africa. The prices in those PPAs were actually pretty high, but that's for a few reasons. Whereas in Israel, we saw solar plus storage taken up under a PPA where the prices were kind of remarkably low, in fact, and surprised the Israeli Energy Authority. And that's really because the solar powers, Israel's a really sunny country, and energy storage can be used in a number of ways there that were beneficial under that tender. And so I think if we're going to see that happen in a more robust way in Europe, it's likely to be kind of centralized government tenders in the southern states. So like Spain, Portugal, Italy would be my kind of three key ones to watch, perhaps Greece as well. And I imagine in those places, solar plus storage under a PPA would be quite competitive in terms of the overall prices. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts on that, because Ville, you had some analysis.
Yeah, I believe that it's a bit maybe difficult to see that there would be PPAs for the storage itself, but if you combine that with renewables, then at least you may find some company or corporate PPAs as off-taker. Of course, the challenge is that all this kind of decarbonization is now measured on megawatt-hour basis, and it does not really matter when you buy the solar power and when you have your own consumption. And I think that probably would speed up these co-located PPAs if there is some regulation changes that you really need to kind of match your load and renewable generation better compared to today's situation.
All right. I think we have time for a couple more questions. For those that don't get a chance to have their questions answered, you can always shoot me an email at the end, and we'll try to connect you to the speakers as well. This next question relates to how storage as a growing asset class will require a certain degree of asset management. The security becomes more important. As more storage is deployed, more, let's say, faults in different ways are found. Ville, what are your thoughts on the incidences that have happened related to battery fires, to batteries now being such an important part in being more developed, requiring kind of to be their own asset class or for them to be managed in their own way? What are your thoughts on this, and how does it relate to operational safety?
Yeah, of course, the safety is the first priority and really core in our company, and we are doing utmost on design and simulation to really make sure that there is no fire or any other incidents happening on these installations. And of course, if you look at in the scale, these assets or the battery storage assets are actually pretty safe and requires quite little asset management or maintenance compared to thermal or even renewable assets. So that's big benefit actually on the business case, that you probably, when you are doing the battery installation, you need to invest probably a bit more compared to some another technologies, but then over the lifetime the management and maintenance is cheaper compared to many other technologies.
All right. Then I think the final question, and it's kind of an open-ended one. I think we could discuss this one all day, but it's relating to other sorts of emerging storage technologies, specifically hydrogen in this case. Do you see in the upcoming years hydrogen taking a role specifically from lithium batteries, or is there a synergy that they can share? They can have different applications for different needs. And how do you see the growing development of hydrogen synergizing with the growing development of storage?
Yeah, I see at least that they are fulfilling two different roles. The batteries are doing the millisecond balancing all the way maybe to 8 or 12-hour batteries on the long run to do the intraday balancing. But then especially together with wind power, there is the challenge of the seasonal variability, and also the periods which may last even a couple of weeks when you have hardly any wind, and there the hydrogen certainly can play the big role as a long-term storage. But at the same time, I think our priority is to decarbonize as fast and cost-effective way, and actually decarbonizing that extreme long duration storage solution, which operates a couple of hundreds hours per year, is the last thing to do, and it's actually the most expensive. And I believe if we do this decarbonization as smartly and cost effectively, gas could be used as this long-term storage, at least for 10, 15, 20 years more, and then we really do the decarbonization of that least impact full part of the power grid on the emission wise.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Ville has just said there. I think it's kind of a common, well, not common misconception, but maybe a misconception in the industry that hydrogen's an energy storage technology, whereas we actually see it as an energy vector. So it takes energy, it's used to decarbonize the really difficult parts of the economy to get to that can't be easily electrified. So we're talking about things like HGV driving, really long distance, for instance, or heat, or things like that difficult to electrify. And so its use case compared to energy storage is very, very different. And we don't see it as a technology that's going to be used to, you wouldn't convert electricity to hydrogen and then back to electricity on a routine basis, maybe in the backup situation that Ville was just talking about, but that wouldn't make financial sense. And the use of hydrogen is more as that kind of energy vector from one type of energy to another to decarbonize, really difficult to get to places. In terms of the synergies, because we are seeing a lot more interest in hydrogen, primarily because of its way of decarbonizing difficult sectors of the economy. I think there is a role to play for batteries co-located with wind and solar in green hydrogen production. That's something that we've looked at a little bit, and we're starting to see some projects doing that in Europe, particularly in Spain. And that could be the way to produce kind of lowest cost hydrogen, well, lowest cost green hydrogen, I should say, because the battery is used to really make the electrolyzer run have a much higher capacity factor than without the battery. That's something that is definitely developing at the moment. I don't think there's a consensus on that just yet, but it's an interesting space to watch, particularly if we see hydrogen playing a much stronger role going forwards.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that very informative answer. It seems that there's some synergies, and it's interesting to clarify, the different types of applications that storage can have, as well as hydrogen. I think with that we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you, of course, to all the attendees who joined us today, as well as thank you the two of you for helping us out with presentations, with the Q&A, and with the discussion. I think there was a lot of information that was addressed. For those attendees that still have questions that we could not address, you will receive an email with the link and the slides as well. You can answer that email asking, can I get in touch with one of the speakers if you have a specific question. You can also address me otherwise at alfonso@solarplaza.com, and I will try my best to connect you with our two storage professionals. From my side, I'd like to remind anyone who's still interested in Solar Asset Management Europe, our conference the 15th and 16th of September in Frankfurt, that we do still have a 5% discount for those that were tuning into the webinar. The code is webinar5. And for those of you that are interested in our other events that are upcoming, I mean, in the Dutch market, something that we saw that is still a developing market, we can see that this one will take place on the 7th of September in Utrecht, so already next week. Then, of course, the Asset Management Europe event that I was mentioning. And finally, for those interested in a new and different emerging solar market, it's, of course, our Floating Solar Conference, taking place on the 28th of September as well here in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. So if you have any questions related to those conferences, feel free to get in touch with me. Otherwise, I'd like to wish everyone a good day. Thank you for tuning and joining us. Ville, George, once more, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise.
Thanks, Alfonso. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.